Good evening, everyone. They were here to discuss the designing the practical and emotional life in space. And I will start with one, let's say, phrase that during my first encounter with Dr. Douglas, it came up, which is building a Mars base is a horrible idea. Let's do it. And this discussion is about understanding the space habitat that we are asked to reflect upon and the personality traits of this environment and the different notions that this designing and conceiving life in space carries, from social to psychological to functional to physical to technological. And with us we have Dr. Adrianos Golemis, flight surgeon, space medicine team, and operations and astronaut group. Javier Tequestelier, architect, technologist, head of design, technology and innovation at Hassel Studio, and director of smart geometry. Mr. George Lordos, PhD candidate, Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And Dr. Alexandros Lordos, PhD director, Center for the Study of Life Skills and Resilience lecturer in clinical psychology and Department of Psychology of University of Cyprus. And of course, the honor to have us to lead this is Dr. Ioannis Daglis, professor of space physics in the University of Athens, president of the Hellenic Space Center, and director of the Observatory of the University of Athens. And I apologize in advance for looking at my notes, but this is to be coherent. And I give the word to the guests, starting with Dr. Golemis, in order to introduce yourselves in your own words. Thank you.
Good evening from me. My name is Adrianos Golemis, in Greek, Adrianos Golemis, en français, Adrien. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm very happy to be part of this panel, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm looking forward to tonight. To introduce myself, so I come from the city of Larissa and I studied medicine in Thessaloniki. I'm a medical doctor. I'll try to share with you tonight a couple of things that I really liked along that brought me to where I work today. So as a kid, actually, I studied astronomy and space. So actually, due to that, I decided to, after my medical degree, to follow a master's in space studies. There is a strange place called the International Space University in Strasbourg, where I did my master's. And actually, this helped me, this paved the way for me to be in very strange places. One of these was Antarctica, where I spent a year in isolation. And the reason of being there, isolated for a year, was to collect medical data and to conduct some experiments in conditions that resemble space. So you're isolated as the astronauts are isolated in space. And this is a station called Concordia, where I spent that year. And of course, that was quite interesting. And it's also helped me end up in the place that you see in this photo, the European Astronaut Center. And this is the heart of human space flight in Europe, actually. It's where European astronauts train and where we, as part of the medical team, follow their health and psychology. And here it's maybe interesting to say that our body and the psychology also can change a lot when we leave our planet and go into space. So that's our job, to make sure the astronauts are healthy and performing well before their space flight, during their space flight, and when they come back to Earth. So if you can advance through the photos, I'd like to share a couple of them with you. This is a place, a pool here in Cologne in the European Astronaut Center where the astronauts train. If you go to the next one, this is actually at the Johnson Space Center of NASA at Houston, and this is the console where the medical doctors, flight surgeons, if you will, sit to monitor the astronauts' health. This is the pool, much bigger in the United States. Maybe you've seen this in some films like Armageddon, where the astronauts simulate being in microgravity. If you go to the next one. So I had the luck to be part of a launch of a European astronaut. And in the next photo, I also was there for the landing. So this is the European astronaut, Luca Parmitano, coming back. So I'm very glad to be able to work in this domain. And I'd like to end my introduction with a message that investing in space, all the research, not just the medical, but also the physics and so on, it's worth it. And I think there are tangible and intangible benefits for all of us to gain. So I think we should continue that. So I think we'll go forward to the moon. And of course, we'll hear today a lot about Mars. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Golemis. Dr. Lordos, Alexandros Lordos.
Hello. I was born in Cyprus in the 1970s, in the midst of war, which affected our country at that time, and that has marked me just like it has marked all of my generation, the whole generation of Cypriots, to be concerned about conflict and peace and what it takes to build a peaceful and resilient society that can withstand adversity. And that work has taken me, that interest and that motivation has taken me towards my current career, where I'm a clinical psychologist that actually collaborates with the United Nations to rebuild social cohesion and mental health and livelihoods in conflict-affected countries around the world. So our work has taken me to various far-flung regions of this planet, not of another planet, but this one, from Nepal to Bosnia, from Ukraine to Liberia, from Rwanda to South Sudan, from East Timor to Malaysia, where we have always faced the same problem, which is how do you take a society and strengthen the bonds of solidarity and companionship that hold people together. So when I had the opportunity 2 years ago to become more involved in issues related to space and space psychology through the work of George Lordos, who will speak next, who is my brother and one of my best friends, who is now at MIT, and he will tell you more about himself in a minute. So when I had the chance to work with him on designing a city on Mars, it sounded strangely familiar to what I was already doing, because if the question is how do you build a society that can thrive under conditions of extreme adversity and remain peaceful and resilient and ensure the well-being of the people who live there, well, that's what I've been doing. So it's not that it hasn't been that much of a leap to start thinking about how a city on Mars can be a sustainable proposition.
Thank you. Mr. Lordos, George Lordos.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. So with my brother, Dr. Alexandros Lordos, we've shared this lifelong passion for astronomy and space. And although our professional and academic interests are quite different, so recently we pooled our efforts and we were able to work together on our shared passion and the vision for a sustainable city on Mars. And hopefully we can tell you more about that later in the program. But I want to tell you a story going back to 1986. So if you remember what happened in 1986, Halley's Comet was coming through this part of the solar system. And we were in high school at the time. So Alexandros and I reactivated the school's astronomy club, and we arranged buses at midnight for all the students to go and see Halley's Comet. But we were clouded out, but they all had a lot of fun in the buses, teenagers in buses at night. So, but what we did, we took a tent and the school's telescope and a small group of dedicated friends, and we camped out on the mountain, and then we got out of the tent at 3 in the morning, and Halley's Comet was there in front of us, like a ghost sailing through the universe. So, you know, we have always wanted to do something together, and we're very happy to have done it finally. So a little bit about me. I'm currently a PhD candidate at MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and my research interests are in the industrial ecology. I think of industry as an ecosystem. In the industrial ecology of the Moon and Mars. And I believe that this is a key enabling capability if we want to have sustainable human exploration and settlement. At MIT, I'm a member of the Engineering Systems Laboratory, working with Professors Olivier de Beck, who's from Switzerland, Professor Jeffrey Hoffman, who was a former shuttle astronaut who repaired the Hubble in orbit, and with Professor Edward Crowley, who co-wrote the Augustine report, if you're familiar with it. This was 15 years ago, and it was the vision that led to today's commercial space. So my teams at MIT are currently working on projects for NASA and for the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And some of the work we're doing includes a proof of concept for a self-deploying tower to support the exploration near the permanently shadowed regions of the Moon, where we believe there is ice to be found. There is also a prototype for a prospecting system that we're building to search for and recover underground ice on the Moon and Mars. And recently I've written with others a white paper on ensuring economically viable lunar settlements that we have briefed to the House Science Committee, and we will be briefing to the National Space Council soon. I also lead the team of teaching assistants at MIT's System Design and Management program, and that's a very interesting aspect of my work. We train mid-career professionals on the fundamentals of system architecture and systems engineering. And generally, I'm very interested in space economics, space settlements, and establishing supply chains on other worlds based on local resources. So the fundamentals for a future for humanity in space.
Thank you very much. And Mr. De Castellier, Javier De Castellier. We don't hear you. No.
You probably have muted your microphone.
I have indeed muted
Okay,
my microphone.
that's
Is this
good.
better?
Yeah.
Very good. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. So I'm Xavier de Castellier. I am an architect, and I'm head of design technology and innovation at architecture practice Hassel Studio. Now, for the last 10 years, I've been involved in designing habitats, space habitats for the Moon and for Mars. Next slide. Next slide, please. The one you see here is was. Can you go back, please? Yes, that's it. Thank you. The slide you see here is a design we did for a 3D printed Mars habitat, part of NASA's Centennial Challenge. And you might think, why is an architect involved in this? Go to the next slide. If you look at the International Space Station, that is, of course,
Going to
next slide. Yeah. Yes, thank you. If you look at the International Space Station, well, very few architects or designers are actually involved in this. And why would they? This is literally rocket science, right? This is really technologically and advanced. Next slide. But I would argue differently. I would argue that designers and architects should be involved in designing these habitats. Not sure about you, but I wouldn't really want to live in a space like this. So I see astronauts now are merely surviving, and I don't think they're actually living in these spaces. So I think, yes, architects and designers have a role to play. It doesn't mean that we let go of all the technicalities. Absolutely not. This is how we'd, for example, start a design, looking at the life support. Next slide. and detailing everything in really high precision, looking every little nut and bolt that needs to go into a system like this. Next slide. And besides the architecture that you see on the right-hand side, we also even look at the mission architecture, not only about the objects themselves, how they get built, but how they get to Mars and how they get launched from Earth and how they travel to Mars. Next slide. If you play the video now. And even looking how we protect ourselves once we are there on Mars, how we protect ourselves from radiation, gamma radiation coming from the sun or from the galaxy. And then, next slide, not even looking at what we're going to build, but how we're going to build it. So we're designing also our robotic system that will 3D print a shell structure that protects ourselves from the radiation. Next slide. But it doesn't mean these spaces need to be highly technical. Spaces we want to thrive for, we want to try to design spaces where astronauts want to live, want to work, next slide, and want to live in a very comfortable way. Because they're not going to be there for a few months, they will be for much longer periods of time. And next slide. And this is one of those habitats that we designed that we now also build up in a one-to-one scale to test it out. So this is one-to-one, and this was exhibited in the Design Museum, and it's now exhibited, it was exhibited in the Design Museum in London, and it will now open in Stockholm in the Science Museum there in about a month's time, I think. Thank you.
Great, and thank you very much. I pass the word to Dr. Douglas.
I think we are very lucky to have all these eminent experts with us tonight, and I would suggest. Okay, I would suggest to start our discussion and start exchanging views, and I would put as a first thematic topic to start our discussion the issue of challenges and merits in space. We all know how challenging the presence and the survival of humanity is outside the Earth's atmosphere. And I would invite the thoughts and conceptions that our fellow panelists have on regarding the dangers that we face in space and how we can overcome the dangers. And moreover, if these dangers and these challenges are worth facing in view of the benefits that we have from exploring and maybe colonizing space. And by merits, I mean not only the practical merits, like, for example, securing resources from asteroids or things like that, but also things like inspiration for the next generation or solidarity among people who face the same dangers, innovation, things like that. So we would be happy to have your thoughts about this important aspect of space exploration, benefit versus challenge, and how you perceive this issue.
And anyone
I can go first. Everyone's good with that. This is Adrianos. So hopefully you can hear me. Being a medical doctor, of course, I have to say that the challenge is always great for our body and also for our psychology. And I heard Dr. Alexandros Lordos before talk about psychology. I think it's also important not to underestimate how our mind and our mood can be affected when we live either in a station around the Earth or when we venture forth to the moon or hopefully to Mars. But from the medical point of view, I would say that when we leave the planet, a lot change in our bodies because actually we have evolved to live on our planet, on planet Earth. So when we leave this environment, we live without gravity, and our bodies have to adapt to conditions that are completely different from anything our predecessors have lived in. Some short-term challenges like space motion sickness. This is something that occurs when you first go to space during your first days. You can be disoriented, and as you have the feeling that you fall down, actually, there is no gravity. This can affect you. You can be nauseous and so on and so forth. But then the body adapts, and that's really remarkable. But you do have also long-term effects, and I think it's important to consider these when we go further than the orbit of the Earth. And what I'm talking about is mainly the effect on our bones and muscles, as we do not use them because there is no gravity. The astronauts do not need to walk in space. So they do not train their body and muscles naturally as we do. And they diminish in mass and in performance. And we can also think about radiation. This is a major challenge because when we leave the Earth, actually, we're not protected from the atmosphere and the magnetic field of the Earth. But I think the question of Dr. Douglas is very interesting because you invited us to talk about challenges versus benefit. And as I tried to point out in my introduction, I think the tangible, but also the intangible, the indirect benefits of space exploration are many. We can perceive some of them. For example, this morning I read that a laboratory of a NASA laboratory managed to design some very early tests against the coronavirus, so a very real challenge, in record time, and they contributed in the beginning. So you see, actually, the benefits are tangible for the society on the Earth, and not only for the astronauts or to explore further. But it's also very interesting to consider the indirect benefits. And Dr. Douglas, you mentioned, of course, inspiration. The new generation can be inspired to contribute to science. I myself, actually, I'm not a scientist, I'm a medical doctor. But as I said, it was through astronomy and through seeing this spirit of exploration that I was moved to start my own journey. And I really am thankful for that.
Okay. Mr. Lordos and Alexandros Lordos.
We don't hear you.
Sorry. So I agree with what Dr. Glemis has just said, and especially about the inspirational value of human space exploration and space settlement. Together with my brother, we presented some of our work regarding Star City, and which we will share with you in a few minutes, to a group of 10-year-old school children at my son's school here in Cyprus. And the children were the most enthusiastic audience that we had ever presented to. And we can be talking for a long time about the benefits. And of course, there are challenges in every human endeavor. So to be perfectly honest, I am kind of bypassing the question of challenges because everything in life is challenging. And that can never be a criterion for deciding to do or not do something. The question always is the benefit enough? And I think the benefit of giving new purpose to a young generation, giving a shared objective that can bring humanity together, I believe that, and especially to and one where we can actually show what we can do together in an extremely adverse environment of a human settlement on the surface of another planet. I believe proving that and showing to the rest of the world, showing to the world on this planet how it can be done, I believe the role modeling value of that and the hope that will instill in humanity, I believe, is the greatest benefit.
And for Mr. George Lordos, perhaps to talk a little bit about how the social and the interpersonal conflicts in a hostile environment like Mars could be handled based on your project of the Star City.
So I wanted actually to touch on the very interesting question of the challenge and the benefit. With perhaps the observation that the challenge leads directly to the benefit. So on a hostile world with almost unlimited resources, it's a very different setting where we are incentivized to work together socially, pool our interests, pool our skills and our talents and pool our risks, and support each other through what we will face. And in the process, we grow as the individuals will grow who are there, but we grow as humanity as well. And we then culturally export that back to Earth because it's like an example. It's like a different vision of how we could be as opposed to the day-to-day conflicts and petty differences that divide people and nations and countries and so on. So that's what I would say, that the challenge is the benefit, and the challenge of living on other worlds will improve us as individuals and as humanity. And
I have to say that I am very fond of this positive and optimistic view presented by Alexandros and George Lordos. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. And we're up for Mr. de Castelier's also inside.
Hello. Yeah, I think the benefits, well, I'm actually not a great believer that we'll go to Mars to colonize Mars and to kind of, just like Elon Musk says, have 1 million people there living there in the next 50 or 100 years or something like that. I'm not really a big believer in that, because as we started this day by saying that, you know, living on Mars is a really bad idea. Anyway, it's just such a harsh environment. And I would actually like to put the analogy back to what we're doing on Antarctica, right? We're not really moving to Antarctica, are we? We have research bases on Antarctica to do science. And I believe Mars is probably similar to that. So the reason why we would go to Mars is simply to do research and to do science. And I think for me, that is really a good enough reason to go, right? But I don't believe that will then immediately lead to colonization of Mars. I'm not really fond of that, because I don't think it is actually that necessary to do that. So for me, and yes, of course, the challenges, yes, of course, there are huge challenges to go. It's extremely difficult to do. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, because, you know, human beings, people love to do difficult things and love to explore at the same time. So yeah.
Yeah, so may I, Annie?
Of course.
So yeah, I would actually agree with Mr. de Castellier that the prospect of colonization of Mars is really very, very weak, at least for the foreseeable future, because of the harsh environment of Mars. But to summarize what we heard, our panelists believe that we will have a number of significant benefits, both for research and science, and I would totally agree on that, because science, technology, research, they will all benefit from the innovations that are necessary in order to create an outpost in Mars, exactly because it is so difficult to create this outpost and to sustain it. But I also share the positive ideas of Mr. Lordos and Dr. Lordos about the impact of such an endeavor on inspiration and solidarity among humans. And having said that, I would proceed to the next theme that we would like to share with you, which is a practical one and refers to the sustainability of the human presence in space, and to be more concrete, on Mars, because three of you have a very direct relation, so to speak, with the plans for the colonization of Mars. And don't take the term colonization literally. Even a research outpost is a major endeavor, and its sustainability is not plausible, as you know. I mean, of course you know, because Mr. de Castellier has been involved in the NASA Centennial Challenge. Mr. Lordos has worked on the concept of Star City. So you know very well what I am talking about, how the presence of humans on such a difficult, on such a harsh environment can be sustainable. And we would like to invite you to provide your thoughts and comments on the sustainability of such a presence in the hostile environment of Mars.
And perhaps I would like to start with a question to Dr. Golemis, if I may, based on this trail of thought, about how can one prepare for loneliness, isolation, self-sufficiency, and sensory deprivation, and how can we ensure a long-term health for prospective colonists, and whether there is a limit in regards to how much we can push the human body to prepare for.
Thank you for the question. There are, of course, limits, but I think it's human nature to push the limits further and further and try to accommodate more. And I think this ties in very well with sustainability. What was said previously about colonization, if I can start on that, let's take the example of Antarctica. Originally, we had people go to Antarctica actually just in the last a bit more than 100 years. And now, progressively, people stayed a bit longer, and now we have winter over missions. It's not permanent settlement, but it's long-term. And I think the same concept applies to space. And probably it will also apply to the moon. Humans have been to the moon, and now there is an international collaboration to go back and stay this time for a longer period, and hopefully also to Mars in the future. So of course, as you mentioned, a major challenge here is that you are deprived of interests, you are faced with a monotonous everyday life, and of course you are very far from the people that you care about. And if I may draw an analogy here, many of us around the globe are actually going through a phase a bit like that due to the current coronavirus crisis. So I think all people can appreciate how hard that can be. And bear in mind that the astronauts that set out on such a mission may have to be isolated and confined for 6 months, for a year, for 3 years, maybe even for longer. How do you prepare for that? There are a number of countermeasures that we use, for example, for the astronauts. Nowadays, the astronauts fly just around the Earth, which means we can resupply them. We can send small rockets that actually can provide them with essential material if they run out of something, or if they need extra medication, or something to cheer them up, which is also very important. This, of course, will be limited when we set out for the moon or for Mars. So how do you prepare? You select the right people that are motivated enough to go through this, and you train them. And you try your best to keep human contact. Now, if we go to Mars, and if this brilliant idea of the Star City comes to be, hopefully in a few generations' time, then, of course, there will be a delay, that the communication between a person on Mars and a person on the Earth will be delayed. It will not be real time. But still, I think there is something in human contact that can make one endure such a mission. And again, I think this ties very well with sustainability. And hopefully I've answered your question or the better part of it.
Great. Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Golemis. And from Dr. Golemis to Dr. Alexandros Lordos, we always in line with what Dr. Daglis introduced, which are the parameters to consider for the emotional well-being of the colonists in a hostile environment like Mars, and whether this is similar to asking someone, or in a way, to rewire the human brain and the way that the human being exists and functions. And when we, again, draw the line, how do we know that?
Let me say something different than what I was thinking of saying, but I will speak very quickly and then hand over to George to take us a bit through what we've been discussing, thinking regarding Star City. But really what I want to say here is that unless we actually move to the concept of having thousands of people on Mars, we will never be able to sort out the emotional well-being problem. You cannot have emotional well-being in an isolated outpost of a few dozen people doing a science project. Of course, it's important to do this science project, but those people will always be longing to go back home where their real life is, and they will only be there as visitors. So if we want to get serious about making people comfortable on Mars, that's what the emotional well-being means, to feel at home, then we have to make a real home for them there, which means that we have to create a real society there, which means that we do have to start moving closer to Elon Musk's vision of thousands or even 1 million people on Mars. And that's definitely where we come from in terms of our perspective, and we respect, of course, the opposite viewpoints that were expressed earlier. But let me hand over to George Lordos to explain to you how we are conceptualizing Star City as a place where this can become possible.
Please.
Thank you, Alexandra. This is Mars, and Star City is designed to be located in a crater on Mars. So in the next slide, you see an overview of what Star City would look like. Now, in this picture, you should imagine that most of the city is underground, inside the crater rim, in tunnels, and then the tunnel network connects to the domes that you see glinting in the night. In the next slide, you can see a laser. This Star City has a vision of an energy-rich city. So, the sustainability starts at the foundation, where you have so much energy that you don't know what to do with it. Well, one thing that you can do with it is shine a light of hope back to Earth, so that children can see the laser on Mars from their backyard telescopes. You need very bright laser to fight the reflection of the sun from the planet, but you can do it. And so how would we build a Star City on Mars? In the next slide, I'll show you a concept for how this is done. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a terrestrial picture. This, the people on Mars wouldn't be standing there like that. It's just to show you what it is like. So this is a road header, and it is a very flexible tool. It can carve a tunnel of any shape that you want, or a cave of any shape. So the idea is that when we send people to Mars, we don't send them there with 10,000 detailed solutions. We send them there with a very small number of very flexible capabilities. And then we trust them to use their intellect and their cooperation and their wits to solve the problems. So in the next slide, you'll see what the tunnel network looks like. So this is, you see different colors. Some tunnels are roadways, other tunnels are storage or greenhouses with light emitting diodes, industry, living space, leisure space. And then the tunnel network allows you to exit to the surface of the planet, or it allows you to look at the planet by connecting to domes that protrude from the crater wall. So in the next slide, I have a picture of what the domes look like. It's like a small rendering. So you can imagine that these can be public spaces where you have a connection, a visual connection with the distant horizon of Mars, and you can see what Mars is like. And in the next slide, maybe the idea of physical security and comfort is foundational to happiness and to sustainability. So the homes in Star City would be very spacious. Even though they're in tunnels, there are artificial skylights that simulate the exact wavelength of the sunlight as it is on Mars at that moment. So everything possible is done to make people feel comfortable and at home, as Alexandros was saying. So in the next slide, so maybe after many, many generations, the descendants of the first inhabitants of Star City would pressurize their crater with a little atmosphere, maybe not necessarily a breathable atmosphere, and then create a lake where they can sail and enjoy the water, which is where we come from. We come from a water planet. So sustainability, I will just say that if we don't start with the strategy of giving capabilities to our people who will be going to Moon and Mars and letting them solve the problems, I don't think that any other concept is sustainable if you want to have a big city. I don't think you can manage everything from Earth. So that would be the most fundamental piece in the puzzle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tequestelier,
Hi there.
hi there. How about
Hey.
the role of technology, or if you have something to add to what the other guest said?
Yeah, I think I do, and I want to kind of talk a little bit about the sustainability aspect of it. Could you just bring up my slides again and show the second slide of my slide deck? That'd be great. Is that possible?
Can we bring up the slides, the second slide of Mr. Castellier?
That's great. Yeah, that's it. So this is a visualization we had done from a project by an external visualizer. And when we got the first image back, I thought it was beautiful. But I did notice something interesting that was on the bottom right corner. Do you see that? That are all the 3D printing robots. They've just done their job. They've built the habitat and they're finished. So, and I was horrified because the visualizer was right. Where are these robots going to go? No, they have to go somewhere. They've done their job. But I just realized we created the first boneyard on Mars. So I was like, well, we have to do this differently. So because of that, we actually redesigned our robotic system that didn't, after it became 3D printers, they actually became transportation modules, robotic helpers. They became all different types of functions after the 3D printing. So that gave us a clue. We started thinking, well, we need to reuse and repurpose whatever we have there as much as we can. And from that point onwards, we started to look at it in a completely different way. And if you can now go to my last slide of my presentation quickly, we started to rethink, for example, furniture. Can you go to the last slide of my presentation? Just quickly. There we go. Thank you. We started to think, whatever we bring to Mars has to be very light, but everything's going to be very expensive to get it there. And we thought, well, furniture, for example, what's the furniture going to be made out of? And if you look at the furniture there, it looks quite chunky. And that is because we're not planning to take it to Mars. We're planning to build it on Mars. And this is actually all 3D printed with recycled plastics. Because there will be science experiments, there will be food packaging, that will have all packaging that will need to be reused and recycled. And we're thinking of, well, why don't we actually reuse it to actually build stuff with instead of just throwing it away? So there's also lots of different things that we worked on. We even worked on working with a fashion designer You see the person on the right there is wearing one of them, where we started to think about reusing the landing parachutes. So why not reuse the landing parachutes where we would land stuff on Mars with and reuse it to make clothes out of? So really start to rethink really hard. Whatever we do on Mars, why don't we try to recycle and reuse it and upcycle it much harder than we do on Earth? Because remember, as was mentioned before, in the ISS, International Space Station, you get resupplied. On Mars, it would be very hard to do that. So for us, and for myself personally, I started to look at sustainability in a completely different way, because once you're there on Mars, we can't just start making a dump, right? We have to really be careful whatever we bring and how we use materials.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. De Castella. You have brought up two very important issues. One is, you said we cannot create a dump as soon as we are on Mars. And this relates, of course, to planetary protection, the concept of planetary protection, to which I will come back later. But then you also mentioned that your basic concept for your design of the shelter on Mars was to use local material, not to bring the materials to Mars from Earth, but to use whatever is usable on Mars. And I think this is really a central concept, and also probably the solution for sustainability regarding materials and the practical needs. And I would also like to comment on what Mr. Lordos said about the emotional well-being. I understand your idea, but I would disagree with you that emotional well-being is not important for a group of scientists who are on Mars or on the Moon only for a limited time period, because I believe that it is essential also for people who are in a hostile environment for a limited period of time to experience an emotional well-being. I mean, I don't think one could argue that because they are there only for a limited time period, it's not important for them. How would you comment on that?
Well, I certainly wouldn't disagree with you, Dr. Douglas, that of course the well-being of the emotional well-being of small groups that travel to space for limited duration is important. It's just that that kind of setup is not sustainable in the long term, and eventually such a group of people, for their well-being, will have to return home at some point. So my comment was more related to the sustainability and whether we can have whether someone can sustainably experience emotional well-being in space, and that would require community being established in space. But I think the one thread that connects these two aspects, the emotional well-being of whether it's a small group in space or of an emerging community on the surface of the Moon or Mars, I think it is about ensuring what I call the triple identity approach regarding if I'm a human in space, if I'm a human on Mars, or on the International Space Station, or on the Moon, at a base, or in a city on Mars, how do I understand myself as a person? What's my identity? And I would like to propose a triple approach to identity. First of all, I'm a survivor. Yeah, I'm in a very harsh environment, like the polar explorers of old. I'm in there is danger and the threat of sudden death at every morning that I wake up, and the overcoming that, surviving through that in solidarity with my mates, with my teammates, is an important part of my identity while I'm in space. Secondly, I'm an explorer. Yeah, I am instead of being in a crowded space, in a crowded planet with billions of other people, making sure that I don't bump into people that are around me, I'm in the vast expanse, and everything is new, and I can go anywhere I want, and I can be anything that I want to be. And that takes us to the third aspect of identity, which I think we haven't paid enough attention to yet in the field of space psychology, which is that I am a philosopher. I am someone who is investigating what it means to live a good life, and what a good life means when you are in this extreme situation where what is common and what is traditional and what your parents and grandparents have done is no longer a guide for your life. So how can we have people, well, in our case, we focused it on this problem from the perspective of a city on Mars, and we thought that, for instance, we came up with what we call the dual professional specialization approach, where every resident of Star City would have a survival-oriented profession, such as tunneling or aquaponic farming, and an expression-oriented profession, such as being a fashion designer, being a gardener, being a spiritual guide, being a poet. And by balancing those identities, and of course everyone would be an explorer by the virtue of being there and getting out through the airlock onto the surface of Mars. So by balancing those identities, people would be able to offer themselves to one another at all of those levels, and that would create a strong sense of cohesion and solidarity.
Sorry, thank you, Doctor. Yes, we have only 8 minutes left, and we have one question also from the public. So,
okay, I would just wanted to thank Dr. Lordos. Your answer was very enlightening, and yes, the way you put it, I think that it answers how emotional well-being could be sustained, but really in a society that feels in Mars at home. That would be the major difference, I think. Indeed. Thank you very much.
okay, before we go to the question for the public, I will touch upon the second part of the third point, very briefly, which is, would the transformation of a pristine planetary environment be acceptable from an ethical and environmental point of view?
It's a delicate question, of course.
Very delicate question.
Talking about terraforming another planet, or is that what we're talking about? Or?
Well, okay, the question has, the meaning of the question, you know, if you have read Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, the trilogy, Red Mars, Green Mars, Blue Mars, this issue is touched upon by some of the protagonists, because there is a disagreement if humanity has the right to change a pristine planetary environment in any way, either by creating outposts or even more drastically through terraforming. And I mentioned this before when you said we should be very careful on Mars to do recycling as much as possible in order, as I understand, to avoid polluting Mars, for example, and to avoid changing its face. So the question is, do you feel that humanity has the, how should I say, the ethical right to change a planet that has been pristine for millennia?
Or it has a good reputation that renders it capable in doing that and rightful in doing that?
Right. Xavier, are you taking this? I can volunteer as a philosopher. I can volunteer. So
I can take it.
Yeah, thanks. So you know, I would say that all life has the urge to take advantage of its environment to maintain its continued existence. What is at stake here is whether, as humans, we have the wisdom to live in harmony with the environments that we choose to call our homes. And this is the same for Earth and the same for the Moon and Mars. And we have obviously not done a good job of this on Earth. So one of the benefits that we see from human settlement of the Moon and Mars is that we have an opportunity for a fresh start that is designed by by the leaders of the enterprise to be more sustainable than what we do here today. And in this way, we are also sending back the example. Once again, I'm returning to the theme of the example. So if we want to survive, we have to learn to live in harmony with the environment. I don't see that as a conflict. So I would not agree that we do not have a right we have the right as long as we are self-restrained, and we have to grow and become self-restrained.
And again, you gave a very optimistic view. I am happy with this, and I would agree that in Mars, the humanity may have a second chance to prove themselves.
Yes, to redeem ourselves. Yes.
I think there is a major difference, I think, if you would go to a planet where there is some sort of life, even if it's the minimum amount of life, I think then the actual equation actually changes for me. So if you go to a planet where there is no life, or you can prove there is no life, I think you can, as a species, I don't think there's an issue with inhabiting it and changing it, as we do with our own planet, as long as we do that in a way where we, let's say, we do it for a certain purpose, right? And don't do it just for greed. I would say that. But I think there's a massive difference if it is, if you find life or not life. I think there for me there's a big change there of approach.
Thank you. We have some questions from the public, but we have time only for one, unfortunately. So in life in space, we know that muscles lose their volume and tone due to the absence of gravity. What should be planned for sport in space is the question. Thank you.
If you agree, I'll take a hit on that one from the medical perspective. So thanks for the question. Indeed, muscles suffer a lot in space, and the rate at which they lose their efficiency can be surprising. So, I'm right now, so without doing anything, I'm utilizing some of my muscles. But in space, since there is no gravity, in everyday life, astronauts do not use them at all. So it's natural that they lose them naturally. What can we do for that? There are a few countermeasures. The most important of all at this point is exercise. So actually, you can think about astronauts on the International Space Station, and what they do is they have a long day conducting science, and at the end of this long day, they still have to exercise 2 hours. Usually that's 5 times a week, and it's long exercise, but they need to do it to activate actually as much as they can the muscles that they do not use otherwise, and that we all, or most of us, use in everyday life. There are quite a few ideas of how to tackle this issue when we send astronauts further away, for example, to the moon or to Mars. But what needs to be looked into is how does the partial gravity of the moon or of Mars, how can that actually sustain the capacity of the muscles? So on the moon, we have about 1/6 of the gravity of the Earth, and on Mars, we have about 0.38, so about 1/3 of the gravity that we have on the Earth. Is that enough, actually, to keep astronauts fit? Remains to be seen, and that's why we also have to continue doing research and apply all the knowledge that we obtain from that to diseases and so on that we see on the Earth.
Thank you very much. Thank you, each one of you, for this wonderful panel. I think we could keep going on and on. And thank you also to Dr. Douglas for the amazing co-leading.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure, and it has been a pleasure to meet our distinguished panelists.
Yes, and I want to make a parenthesis that the Star City designs that we saw, it's by the Delta architects, that they were the architects for all the visuals for the Star City project. Tatiana Koupa and Nikos Papapanousis. And that this this discussion is in collaboration, of course, with the French Institute, which has been a beautiful process. And thank you all for being part of it. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Many thanks
Thank
from
you,
our side.
everyone.